the title affective archives brings together two words that are already existing, that we know what kind of affect more or less is, and we know what archives are, but it's the fact of joining the two words that is more kind of unusual. And I think for us and for me is a way of trying to think about archives in a different way. So rather than thinking about archives as a collection of objects or materials that are already there in some way or other, and we want to bring into focus the importance of the person who goes into the archive and does things with archival materials. And so in a way affective archives is an archive seen from the point of view of the actions that we do with the archives. So in other words, with performances, how we perform the action of interrogating, of using the archive as a way of having a relationship with archival materials. So I think that it is a way to stress both the subjectivity of working with the archives and also the way that archives in themselves are incomplete without a certain amount of work and movement and affect, what we call affect, that brings them to life for a future use again. Well, it brings us into the future in the way that archives are interrogated always from the present time. So apparently they're about the past, but in fact it's always a relationship that the present time and as contemporaries we kind of look towards what's left from the past in order to kind of making it important again for some purpose, for some in order that kind of knowledge about the past can actually kind of propel us into the future. So this is a way of looking at the archives not as past matters, but it's kind of engaged with the now, and in order to change it, because with our intervention archives are always changed. It's kind of another paradox that affective archives never stay the same. So it's archiving is not just about preservation. It's unavoidably, I would say, it's about changing the archives by the way that you're using them. You're kind of you are reimagining them, recombining them, representing them. So the past is never left alone, in a way. And this is a step towards changing the past through our own contemporary relationship with it. Of course, joy and terror are opposite affects, in a way. I think we want to bring them together because dealing with archives is a kind of gives kind of enthusiasm or joy because when we deal with archival materials we are always kind of compelled to ask questions. We are excited. Without this kind of excitement we would never kind of go in search of archival materials. They would stay there untouched. So the affect or the impulse that moves us to touch these things has to do with a certain kind of expectation. We expect to be renewed, to find something that it is invigorating. In a way, there is hope. So without hope in these material kind of artifacts and this kind of archival matters, we would never be interested in them. So I think this is about the joy, in a way, the kind of opening that that we can also term or hope. But at the same time, the terror that we speak about in affective archives is also to do with a lot of examples in the book. that many archives are actually full of gaps. Archives never preserve all of the past. They speak about their often fragmentary, and actually what is not included in the archive is often much more important than what it is, because there's something has happened that has eliminated things from the archive. So terror speaks about the kind of gaps, the silences that have been produced, the exclusions that archives speak about. So archives always speak both about what is in them, what has been included, but also, and more powerfully, about what has been excluded. And often what has been excluded has to do with power. Who has survived? So this is why many archives speak about a certain kind of secret, and often these secrets are the traumas of history. So certain experiences, certain subjects, certain classes, certain communities that haven't been preserved. So this is why archives are both kind of full of hope, but also full of kind of this kind of power relationship. And often they are born out of trauma, in a way. Well, my personal relationship with archives is I have very rarely worked in archival spaces. I have more often been involved with archives as a kind of live-in memories. For example, I have been interested in social movements. For example, feminist movement in Italy, or the gay and lesbian movement. And so the question about these movements is often, how do we make history of those movements? And how can we transmit what was living, the living experience of these people? Why did people come together and kind of try to change society from oppression, for example? And the thing is, how do we do a history of feminism, for example, of the gay and lesbian movement? What are we interested in transmitting as knowledge? And more often than not, the question is, yes, we could write a history of feminism, a history of gay and lesbian movement, but very often what is kind of not preserved is exactly the affect behind these movements. We can kind of describe them as what happened and facts, but what is missing is actually the impulse that these people felt and what brought them together. So there is often the case that when we talk about experiences that maybe come from below, or the question of how to make history, or how to kind of make an archive of those movements, has to do with we cannot really treat those experiences as kind of normal facts, historical facts. And so I'm interested in the way that you have to try to archive things that are very easy to lose. This is my interest in archives, and in fact I tend to be more interested in things that are difficult to pass on. And as a theatre person as well, this is why I'm interested in spectators, because we document performances, we can document video, record things, but then what is left out is always the experience of actually seeing, and maybe so that each spectator becomes a living archive of what they've seen. And this is exactly what is left out from any archive. So each spectator becomes his or her own archive. But that's, of course, is what is often, and in a way, out of the picture. But this is what moves me to talk about effective archives.